not sure that I have, excuse me, a great deal of idea just what I'm going to say today in this video, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've been working on for what now seems like an absolute eternity. Uh, it is many years. I started it before even my wife and I went on our honeymoon, so that was 5 years ago. And honestly, it might have been started before we got married, which was a little longer than that. So it's been a long time. And it has consumed a great deal of my creative energy over that time. And it still is, because I'm not finished. But I thought I would talk a little bit about the novel that I have been working on. More about the process than anything else. I don't know, maybe it's useful information for someone out there. So I've talked a little bit with friends about this, but I feel like the most that I learned in writing this book was how not to write a book for me. And everybody's process is different. You hear that all the time when you talk to authors and hear them talk about their writing. And every author, they might have a successful formula, but it's a successful formula that worked for them. And the next author down the road has a successful formula that worked for them, and they are nothing alike. So I've tried out different things. I know myself in some ways. So I know that there were some things that wouldn't work for me. I did not type this on the computer to start. And I didn't do that because I have done that in the past. And what ends up happening is I spend all my time re-editing what I've written previously. So I get a page or two written, and that first page or two, they get edited and re-edited and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. By the time I've gotten to page 9 or 10, those first couple pages have been just absolutely butchered and redone 100 times. And I have wasted all this time, and page 10 isn't very good, and then I peter out on the project, and I never touched it again. And that's what happened to me many times going back years when I would write on the computer directly, or on, I had a word processor, that step in between the typewriter and the computer, the word processor. It got me doing a lot of work, but it was not a great system for me. So I know that I am better if I write out longhand. I have taught myself transcription of my longhand onto the computer, because early on when I tried to transcribe things, I fell into the same trap. Editing, re-editing, and never finishing the transcription, much less the actual story. So I've now taught myself how to transcribe my work onto the computer. I can do that. And so I write it out by hand, I translate it onto the computer. So I thought when I wrote this book, I would start by doing something I had seen people do before, which was break down the story beats. I wrote an initial concept. Actually, it was several concepts that got blended together. Figured out that initial concept, wrote a general outline of the concept showing, what the plot progression of each story arc would be over the course of the novel and how they would weave together. And then I took those pieces from that outline and I created 3x5 cards, or whatever size this is. I think this is slightly larger than 3x5, but I created cards for each plot point, and then on that would write important information about that plot point. I would have who the main character or the viewpoint character was for that, name of the little chapter. Not that they would actually end up being that. Important information to get across, maybe little plot beats within that moment, and sometimes I would write in other just general notes. And I did that for all of the moments that showed up in my outline. And I thought it was a pretty good idea. Going back, I really thought it was a good idea. I thought it was going to work well for me. And what it would allow me to do, because I had all of these done, and I had them all set up. I would carry them around with me so that whenever I wanted to, I could work on a chapter. And because I had them all set up this way, I didn't need to write one chapter after another. I could write whatever chapter I felt like. If I was in the mood to write about one character, I could jump forward and write about that. If I was on a roll with one character, I could skip the other viewpoint characters and go right to the next thing. And for a while, that seemed to work pretty well. And I was writing it out in this journal, handwritten, going through plot beat by plot beat. Great. Then I started to slow down, and I started to run into various problems. Certain things didn't work. What ended up happening, and this is totally understandable, and I'm sure this happens with everybody. I always think of Frank Herbert with this, but Tolkien definitely has the same sort of issue. Certain things didn't work, so I kind of took it back to the drawing board in some ways. And what I ended up doing was excising whole bits. I had originally planned to have, I think it was 4 viewpoint characters. There was a character called Amaral, who was a ship's captain. He was going to be kind of a little bit of a scoundrel, a little bit of like a Treat Williams-y type character. And I thought he would be a fun, he'd be a little more dangerous, a little more exciting, a little Captain Harkness or Jack Harkness there from the early appearances in Doctor Who, not so much as time went on. But he just wasn't working. And it wasn't even the character, it just wasn't. As I went further and further into it, I was less and less enamored of his story as it was playing out, and started just feeling like that was the wrong place to focus, and ended up kind of just trimming most of his story. He still appears in the novel as it is right now, but he is a very much a supporting character. I had another character heavily inspired by Anthony Bourdain, but also a little bit by like a CAD file. Originally the idea was that he was part of the church, and it's not set in our world, but there is a church which I have modeled moderately off of the Catholic Church, but it has a very different doctrine, and there's reasons why it is similar, and there are reasons why it is very different. It as its place in society, within the society that most of the story is dealing with, it holds a similar place to the Catholic Church. I'll put it that way. Less that it is like the Catholic Church, more that it has a similar cultural position. Eventually, I really liked this character. I really, really liked this character. But as I was writing, less and less did his story make any sense within the overall structure of the book. There was another character in there basically completely written out. So what am I left with at this point? Well, I had another character, and this is a character that I have been writing about for a really long time, called Baal. No relation to the was it Sumerian god or Babylonian god? Anyway, no relation. Baal started out as my play on Conan. And I had read S.M. Stirling's book, Snow Brother, and I had really liked it. I ended up not liking a lot of other stuff I've read by Stirling, but I really liked Snow Brother. It just hit home when I read it. And I loved Conan. I love Robert E. Howard's Conan stories. Love them. So in my head, Snow Brother and Conan, I kind of wanted to write this apocalyptic warrior kind of story. And I put some stuff together, and it was all right. And this was me in my, early 20s, a long time ago. And, I wrote some stories, and they were fine. They were Conan pastiches, Conan imitations, whatever you want to call them. I moved her out of the apocalyptic setting that she originally was in and moved it more into a fantastical thing, which eventually became the setting for this novel, for a lot of different reasons. You also, if you for my visualization, I say Conan and Snow Brother mixed together in my head for this to come together, but also I was visually inspired. The artist Brahm, who used to do a lot of Dungeons and Dragons art in the late 80s, I think, early 90s, he has this character that he painted several versions of called Neva. And while Baal, I don't think, would ever wear anything as impractical as what Neva is often in, visually she was an inspiration for it. And so like if I that's what I had, 19-20-year-old me had the image of Neva in my head, but then this like future barbarian, and so Baal is still in this novel, but is as originally conceived in this novel, she was going to play a part similar to the way Hercules sort of played in a lot of other myths. And I feel like Hercules is one of those, sure, he has his own little myth cycle, but he just cameos in other figures' mythology. And I think particularly of Jason and the Argonauts, where, Jason gets together this team, and one of them is Hercules. And Hercules is on there, and then Hercules goes off and he does some stuff, and then he's like, all right, peace out, I'm gone. And he just like kind of wanders through someone else's story for a little while. And that was what I wanted for Baal in the novel. And she was going to come in, do a couple of cool things, and then peace out. In fact, originally, I was going to end her part in the novel looking like she had died, because I had this idea where I was going to do this little spin-off story where she has not died, but she gets off on this adventure, and it takes her basically out of the world, so you don't see her again, but she's doing her own thing. Anyway, that's all scrapped. She ends up becoming a primary character in this book in a way that I had not originally intended. Even more strange to me, there is a character who literally was planned to be in one scene. Just going to be an assassin, essentially. That's it. Didn't even have fleshed out what they would like or anything like that. It was going to be a dancing girl who ends up killing a character, taking something from them, and that something is like a catalyst to the overall plot of the book. But it was a one-off. It was just, the little action scene before the opening credits kind of thing, But somehow that kept building. And I was reading a book on Josephine Baker, and I started thinking about how fascinating she was and how, what she was able to do because of her position. And, how she became this hero of World War II. And one thing led to another, and this one-off character was going to appear, never be named, going to appear in a chapter, ended up becoming a much bigger player, to the point where really the novel ends up becoming the story of Baal and Seth, these two characters, and how their lives intersect. Then these adventures are had. All unplanned originally, turned this whole thing on its head, and then I write it all out in here. And I took much longer than I wanted to. I think I'd originally thought I would be finished completely with the first draft in, was it like 3 months, I think was what I thought I would do it, and it ended up being like 9 months, something like that. And then I took a little bit of a break after finishing it to get back to doing some more work on it, and that was supposed to be 3 months, and it ended up being like 9 months. So already this is spiraling out of control. And what I mentioned at the beginning, that I've taught myself how to do my own transcription. I taught myself that afterwards because I needed to. At the time, I thought to myself, boy, wouldn't it be smart if I don't bother myself with anything except getting it on paper. And so I wrote this whole thing out, and I didn't really transcribe a word of it. My wife did a little bit of transcribing for me early on, but then she's a very busy person, and it's a lot of work. So um, got a little bit of a start on things, but most of this I had to transcribe myself, and that was part of what delayed me after I finished writing it out. Going back and transcribing this was a nightmare. Again, something I thought would take me just a little while took me a really long time. So this novel now, going from something that I thought I could take from start to finish in 6 to 9 months, by the time I'm really in any kind of condition to say that I've finished my first draft, it's been 2 years, much longer than planned. And when I'm finished, I look at it, I'm like, this is the first draft. Obviously, it's not finished. It's the first draft, but I look at it, I'm like, this sucks. And it's got things that I like, but it doesn't work. It's missing a middle. The middle was so thin because I would just get to things and I'd be like, I'm not sure what to do here. And I'd write myself a note, come back and work on this later. So it's unworkable. It's unfeasible. It's terrible. So I realized I've got to do a ground up rewrite. Have to rewrite the book. Honestly, from my first draft, pardon me, I doubt there was more than 8,000 or 10,000 words that survived into the second draft. But I start working on the second draft. And in doing so, I have changed from the initial concept even. The 4 characters are now down to 2. The 2 characters that it's focusing on are not the 2 characters it originally was supposed to be focusing on. And I also look at this story arc that I had written into my first draft, and it's too much. And so I look at it again, take it as a whole, what I've done, and I cut it in half. And I'm like, the halfway point of my first draft, that is going to be the climax and conclusion of this novel. Now I have to rewrite the whole thing, with that being the end of the book, instead of this whole second half that I'm just, nope, it's gone. So I start with my rewrites, and I fill this journal, rewriting stuff, changing the focal point character. This takes a really long time. I finally fill this journal, I start this journal, and that's where I'm at now. I'm close to the end, a few chapters left to finish in this rewrite. I am not making the same mistake I made on the first draft. What I do is I write a chapter, one part from one focal point character, one part from another focal point character. I finish it up, and then I transcribe it, because I'm not going to get left at the end of this with a mountain of stuff to transcribe. I am doing that as I go along. But this second rewrite, it's a different book. It's, I don't know. I mostly like it. Sometimes I hate it, but I mostly like it. And so I just wanted to talk about sort of where I was at on that. And if anybody's interested, if you have any questions about what I've done, I have some stuff that worked for me. I can't tell you what's going to work for you, because I do really feel like everybody has a different process. I discovered recently a speech-to-text app on my computer, or function, not an app, I don't know. And that's been helping me. It's terrible, it's really bad at picking up stuff. And this has a lot of proper names, which it can't handle at all. And, but it does trim down it makes it a lot easier. I can just read out what I said. It gets, say, 90% of it. I go back and re-edit, and as I, have to edit it anyway. If I'm transcribing it directly, I would still have to go back and edit it, because what I've written out in longhand doesn't always make a lot of sense, or it has mistakes or whatever. So I have to edit it anyway. So I might as well get the transcribing done as quickly as possible and then just go back and do an overhaul. So yeah, I'm almost finished with this particular draft. I think this will be much closer to what the final book looks like. I still have to go back and rewrite a bunch of stuff. I still have to go back and fix some things and make things make more sense. It's a lot more work than I knew it was a lot of work, but it's been a lot harder than I thought it would be. And it's taken a lot longer than I had wanted. And I think that's part of the problem. And the longer it takes, that snowballs. The longer it takes, the longer it takes. Like, it's harder for me to work on it now than it was 5 years ago. I don't enjoy writing it as much as I did 5 years ago. And I think had I finished this in 1 or 2 years, I would probably be happier. But now it's been 5 or 6 years, and I struggle with it. And I think especially because I think about, novels that take a really long time are usually these like great American novels, or they're, some epic. They're George R.R. Martin, 1,000 pages, ultra complex stories, characters that are super well developed and beloved by millions. What I am writing is essentially like Robert E. Howard, Andre Norton, Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is not deep writing. This is not profoundly thoughtful writing. This is an adventure story. And my particular brand of adventure story, so it's weird because I'm not actually a huge fan of Terrence Malick, but it's a little Terrence Malick-y. Sometimes what I'm writing about, it's like, the action's happening off camera, the excitement. And I've talked a few times and I've joked a few times about it. It's like I'm writing a lot of the stuff that usually you skip over. So when this is all finished, it's probably not, it's probably going to be like maybe 200 pages. This is the kind of novel that I think about authors like an Andre Norton. She would have knocked this book out in 3 months, tops. Because she was doing 3, 4, 5 books a year for years. And it's that's the era, like the Andre Norton of the early 1960s. That's the era of story that this is more maybe compatible with as far as what it's going to be like when it's over. It's a fast read. It's the kind of book, yes, I've worked on this for so long, but it's the kind of book somebody's going to knock out in an afternoon. So that's a little bit weird. It's a little bit weird to work this long and this hard and gone back and forth so much on what is essentially a quick paperback pulp adventure story. So we'll see. We'll see what it's like when it's over. Anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about it. I'm probably going to do some more videos about writing at some point. I don't have great advice for you. I'm just going to talk about maybe my setting. I call it Conquest of the Sphere. It's very fancy. I was at one point, I just realized, I've got to come up with a name for this setting, especially because I've thought about doing some tabletop RPG scenarios for it and things like that. So I'm like, well, I've got to come up with a name for the setting. And it's, okay, Conquest of the Sphere. Yes, I'm a big fan of Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. It's my favorite sequel to the Planet of the Apes movies. It's a setting I have worked on for a really long time, and I really like it. And I'd like people to check it out and discover it at some point. I have written some stories. I've finished some actual stories that are set in this thing, including some about Baal. You can read them on my Amazon page. There will be links below. But those stories were written quite some time ago at this point, since before I started working on the novel. And I don't think I've really written a separate Conquest of the Sphere story since I started working on the novel. And that's kind of another problem. I really need to finish this because it is a black hole of my work. So, let me know if there's anything you want to hear me chat about. Maybe I'll talk about the setting at some point, talk about Baal and why she's sort of so much fun for me to write, who she is, what she is, talk about Seth. Seth, I'm probably not going to talk about. She's somebody that I think I'll wait until you read the novel for people to discover, because I think she's a really cool character. I like her a lot. And, to let you know, yes, absolutely, Josephine Baker is a major inspiration for her as a character. but there is more to her than that. And I think she's really cool and really fascinating. I want to go back now when this is finished. I want to go back and actually maybe write a couple of short stories about her, about some of her other the novel adventures, because I think she could be a very cool character to explore a little deeper. Yeah. So that's what I've got for you today. Check out the links below. If you can spare something on my Buy Me a Coffee thing or on Patreon, where I am trying to write a serialized story right now as I record this video. The serialized story that I'm trying to work on is set in the same setting. It's actually about that Anthony Bourdain inspired character. It's been on hiatus for a while, but I'm trying to get back into it as we speak. Yeah, check it out. I can always use the help, though. So if you've got anything to spare, I could certainly use some assistance on that, because writing does not pay. Not sure if you noticed that, but it really doesn't. So anyway, thanks a lot and take care.